All right, so great to see you guys today as we dive into our fourth week of this series, Insider Trading. It's not about money, it's more valuable than that. And as we dive in, I want to ask you this question: what makes you feel important? For those of you in the room, those of you who are watching online, I want to ask you to really lean into that question. What is it that causes you to feel important? Think back to like the most gripping, the most memorable sense that you have that I'm valuable, I'm important. What just happened that contributed to you feeling that way? Was it somebody who you admired? Did they say something to you? Did they say something meaningful about you to others? Did you pour all of yourself into something and the accomplishment went your way? Maybe it was a group of people that included you and they communicated, they wanted you, they needed you to be a part of their group. What was it that caused you to feel this? And if you're wondering, why would I ask this question? What makes this question worthwhile? It's because you're worthwhile. Another way to ask this question is, what is it that makes you aware of? And what makes you confident of your value? And isn't it true that we all want to be valuable? Isn't it that we want to be seen as valued by others? That all of us are drawn in by people and we're drawn in by things that give us the sense of importance and value. And if you're a teenager right now, this is your sit up and really lean in and listen moment. Your parents are so invested in knowing who your friends are because they understand just how powerful this draw is to be seen as valuable. They understand from their own experiences how vulnerable we all are to being manipulated by the desire for other people to see us as valuable. I mean, how many of us could say this? How many of us have seen it in our own lives? How many of us have seen it in the lives of others, that people all too often will go against their better judgment if it means other people will judge them as valuable or important? How many of us in the story of our lives could say this: I've got chapters in my life in which I did things I didn't really want to do, but I did it because other people would see me as important and valuable. And I'm not just talking about, you got to hear me on this, I'm not just talking about morally embarrassing stuff. How many of us in here, how many of us watching online, we've done admirable things, but the thing driving it was, I want to feel important. I want other people to see me as valuable. How many of us could say, I've pursued a career because I thought that would make me important. I thought other people would see me as valuable. How many of us could say, there have been times in my life I've made major purchases, I've made minor purchases, and the thing underneath that was a desire to be seen as validated. And the story you tell yourself about yourself, what is it that gives you value? Over the course of this series, we've talked a lot about kingdoms. And we've asked you to define kingdom in this way. It is the system that you believe that describes how life works. The system that best describes reality. And it is the answer to the question, who is the authority? And every single person has given their allegiance to a kingdom. It's not a spiritual thing. It's not whether or not you do believe or don't believe. We just all done it. We all have a framework that we believe best describes reality and the way life works. Every single one of us has an answer to the question, ultimately, who is in charge? And we've said over this series, we're going to use the term old kingdom to represent any approach to life that's not under the authority of Jesus. And new kingdom to represent transitioning our allegiance to live for his kingdom and to happily submit to his authority and his leadership. And whatever kingdom it is that you live for, and we all do, that kingdom comes with a set of values. We can compare and contrast them like this. In the old kingdom values, it's power, comfort, success, and recognition. In Jesus' kingdom, the values are service, sacrifice, generosity, and humility. And we're not saying that following Jesus means seeing these things as bad things. They're not bad. That's malarkey to think that. All right? These are not bad things. They are bad values. And if we structure our lives in pursuit of these, because we believe that's where our importance and value and significance is going to come from, it will leave us bankrupt every time. Maybe not at first, but always in the end. And today I'm going to read something from the life of Jesus, a night when he went to a dinner party. And as we read about the events of this dinner party, I want you to spot how these values play out. And it's my hope that we all can see Jesus clearly. In Luke chapter 14, we read, one Sabbath, When Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. He was being scrutinized. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Luke, the guy who wrote this, he was a very careful historian. He conducted interviews with eyewitnesses who were there before he wrote this account, and he wants to make sure we understand what's going on. Jesus was not invited to this dinner party because he was an honored guest or because he was a friend. He was the object of a trap. He was being set up. Do you know what that's like? When someone pretends to be a friend, but they're actually trying to work against you? That's what was happening on purpose to Jesus. They were carefully watching him, and they strategically placed a man in front of him who was suffering. And they wanted to see if Jesus would heal him, because if he did, they were going to use that against him, to shame him, ridicule him, to build a case against him. And for us to understand how that would be a trap against Jesus, we have to understand the religious culture and the mindset of these guys, the Pharisees. And Pharisees had risen to a place of prominence and influence in the culture of that day because of their religious zeal. And it wasn't that what they were trying to go after was bad, but they were convinced that they could put God in a position where God had to bless their country because of their religious devotion. And they believed that if they could get enough people to join them in religious devotion, that God would not only bless their country, but perhaps kick out the Roman occupiers and restore their nation to a place of prominence. And these guys were convinced that power was the way to do that. And the way that they went about it was by making up and imposing very strict religious rules on people to get them to comply to where God would have to bless the nation. And one of the set of rules that they came up with had to do with something called the Sabbath. If you know anything about the Old Testament, if you're familiar with Jewish faith, the Sabbath is a very important day of the week. We know it as Saturday, but it's important for two reasons. One, it was a way to express trust in God. We're not going to work 7 days a week. We're not going to be workaholics. God, we're going to trust you in your way. We're going to trust you to provide for us. Secondly, honoring the Sabbath was a way to receive the gift of rest from God. Sadly, these men had polluted it. They had polluted it to the extent that they had basically made it illegal to be compassionate to people on a Sabbath day because that would be considered work. And so these guys put Jesus in a position where this suffering man was in front of him. They did not invite this guy because he was their friend. They did not invite him because he was an honored guest. They just brought him in because they were hoping Jesus would heal him, not because they cared about him, but if Jesus healed him on the Sabbath day, they could say, see, you're not really devoted. You're a rule breaker. They would somehow use that to shame him or mock him, to build a case against him. And a tragic irony of this evening is that this Pharisee on the Sabbath is actively working a twisted scheme against Jesus, who is the Lord of the Sabbath. He's actively working against the one who is the only one who could give him true and abiding rest. So this is what Jesus did. Jesus asked the Pharisee and the experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. Do you know why they remained silent? Because they knew that it really wasn't against the law. And if they said yes, they would look like jerks in front of everybody. So they had this trap set up for Jesus, but he flipped it around and now he's got them in a trap. So they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, Jesus healed him and sent him on his way. Then Jesus asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on a Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? Well, of course they would. And they had nothing to say. And we're going to come back to how Jesus healed this guy, but first, this is what I want us to focus on. Jesus is the master at asking questions. And he doesn't just ask challenging questions, even though they are challenging. Jesus asks the kind of questions that get down to the bedrock, the deep down beliefs that people have. And he had an approach to people that philosophers call presuppositionalism. And if that is a term that's new to you, it comes from the word presupposition. And a presupposition is your bedrock, your deep down rock bottom belief upon which all your other beliefs sit. Everybody has them. Everybody has presuppositions. Everybody has these deep down beliefs that we build all of our other beliefs on top of. And Jesus was a master of asking questions that not only shined a spotlight on what those deep down beliefs were, but simultaneously exposed how people lived in contradiction to their beliefs. That's why he was so much fun at parties. Now, when somebody realizes that the structure of their life is in contradiction to their deep down beliefs, you only have three options. There are three options and only three options. Here they are. Change your belief, change your behavior, or embrace absurdity and despair. Change your belief, change your behavior, or embrace absurdity and despair. These guys decided they ain't changing their belief and they're not changing their behavior. So let me ask, should we engage people the same way Jesus engaged people? Should we try to do the exact same thing when we're encountering people who maybe believe differently than we do, or we recognize that they live in contradiction to their deep down beliefs? One of my heroes of the faith is a guy named Francis Schaeffer. He actually died here in Rochester in 1984. Some people in Autumn Ridge actually got to meet him before he passed away. And if that's you, if you ever got to meet him, you should know I hold a grudge against you because I'm jealous. This is what Francis Schaeffer said. Each generation of the church and each setting has the responsibility of communicating the gospel in understandable terms, considering the language and thought forms of that setting. If Francis Schaeffer were here, this is what he would say to us. Do you want to reach this city? Do you want to reach people today? If you do, you have to speak their language. You have to climb into their way of thinking and engage them from the inside out. And that's been something we've attempted to do in this series. And here's one of the ways. We've said this life is all there is, or this life is not all there is. Either we're born, we live, and we die, and that's it. Or we're born, we live, we die, and that's not it. Everybody lives forever somewhere. There are incredibly intelligent people, good-hearted people who believe this life is all there is. And yet, they have structured their life as though things like human dignity and moral truth are real. Believe this, but are living like this. And then there are people who believe this life is not all there is. And yet they've structured their life around power, comfort, success, and recognition. Believe this, but live like this. Whenever we find that the way we've structured our life is in contradiction with what we believe, we have three options. Change what we believe, change our behavior, or embrace absurdity and despair. A life in Jesus' kingdom, happily submitted to his authority, is the only coherent life possible. True, deep, abiding rest is found by aligning what we believe and how we structure our lives with him, because he is truth. Now I know I buried the lead. Jesus healed this guy, so let's go back and look at that. Luke describes it this way. So taking hold of the man, Jesus healed him and sent him on his way. He grabbed him. He embraced him. He touched him. Those of you who work on the front lines of giving care to other people, you know all too well how valuable human touch is. You cannot do your job without touching people. Some of you know that my daughter just moved to college. She began her first semester. She's studying to become a nurse. And recently I was talking to a nurse in our church, and she said, is your daughter comfortable touching people? Because she has to in order to be a nurse. To which I said, as the dad of a teenage girl, I've spent my life trying to get her to not touch people. Been discouraging that. Now, I'm just going to accept this as true. I'm not smart enough to explain it or understand why. It's just true. There's something incredibly valuable about human touch. There's something incredibly life-giving about human touch. There's something about human touch that says, I see you, and you're important to me. And in a culture that lacked medical clarity, It's totally normal and understandable why they might have withdrew from him. And a culture that mistakenly attached God's judgment and anger with people who had physical ailments. It's understandable why some people withdrew from him. I don't know the answer to this question, but who knows how long this guy went without anybody touching him in a way to communicate kindness, compassion, and value. Jesus reached out and embraced him. Then he healed him. I want you to think about this. Jesus sees past every filter, facade, and false definition. He sees past every filter, facade, and false definition we put on ourselves. He sees past every filter, facade, and false definition that other people put on us. Jesus sees the unedited, authentic us. Jesus always and only sees the real you. The Pharisee and the other guys involved in the conspiracy, they didn't see that guy. They didn't see him. They reduced him to a medical condition. They reduced him to something physical. They reduced him to his usability in their twisted scheme. Do you know what that's like? Can you resonate with that? Do you know what it's like to be reduced to something incomplete, inaccurate, making you feel unimportant? Anybody who's ever had a failure become public knowledge, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody who's ever felt like they've been reduced to their physical features, you know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's ever felt like they've been reduced to their usability by somebody else, you know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's ever felt like they've been reduced to a stereotype, you know what I'm talking about. But when Jesus looked at this guy, he saw a man who carried the image of God. When Jesus looked at this man, he saw his artwork on display. And when Jesus looked at him, he saw someone of infinite value who carried a heavy burden. And I want to ask you a question. It might be personal, might even be vulnerable. Do you believe Jesus sees you? Does it ever feel like maybe you're carrying something and it's escaped his notice? Do you ever feel like his attention is occupied with other things and he doesn't just see you? Do you ever feel like, Jesus, I just need you to see me right now and respond with compassion? I want you to think about that. I'm going to sit here quietly. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to get honest with yourself and get honest with him. Is there something right now that you want him to see and respond to with compassion? Even though we're in the middle of the message, I'm going to pray, and I would invite you to pray along with me. And if there's something that you're thinking, Jesus, I want you to see this. I need to know that you see it. Share that right now. Jesus, your compassion, your brilliance, your power, your humility, your tenderness, your grace is amazing. And you have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that you give compassion generously and you don't withhold it from those of us who trust in you. You proved that on the cross. But there are times, for whatever reason, we may doubt. There are times, for whatever reason, I doubt. And God, we humbly ask that you would graciously remind us again in a way that is undeniable and irresistible. Amen. Here's another question I don't know the answer to. Why did this guy go along with this conspiracy to trap Jesus? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if being invited into something by prominent people gave him a hit on the drug of feeling important. It's counterfeit recognition, but maybe it just felt like recognition. Maybe he didn't totally know what was going on. Or maybe because power dynamics at play, he felt like he couldn't say no. I don't know. But this is my question. Why was one conspirator given compassion? And what we're going to see is the rest were given condemnation. Why? Why do you think that was? One of the guys who was there that night was a man named Peter, one of the closest disciples and friends of Jesus. He would go on to be known as the Apostle Peter. Years later, he would write a letter to Christians who were scattered all over the world, and one of the reasons they're scattered is because they're facing suffering and persecution. And in this letter he wrote, he said this. He said, "In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility. Clothe yourselves with humility towards one another because," he's going to answer the question why. And when he answers the question why, I got to wonder, was he thinking about the dinner that night? God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And when he wrote that, he was quoting a book from the Old Testament, the Old Testament book of Proverbs. Proverbs 3:34 says, "God mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed." Why was one person given compassion? Because Jesus sees past every filter and facade. God withholds grace not because of our moral failures, but in response to our pride. And God gives grace not because of our moral goodness, but in response to humility. And if anyone would say, well, that doesn't seem very fair, you're right, it ain't fair, and thank God for that. Anybody got kids? Anybody ever been told by your kids, that's not fair? I made a rule, you can't say that in our house. Because I knew deep down, my kids didn't want fair. They wanted their mom and me to be loving. And love and grace trumps fair every time. Humility is not something that you could do to somehow earn something good from God. Humility is the necessary precondition to receive grace and favor from God. Humility says, God, I need you and I need goodness from you, but I don't deserve it. It is a declaration that says, I could never deserve it. There's nothing that I could ever do to put you in a position where you are supposed to give this to me. Pride, on the other hand, says, I'm entitled to this. God, because of my lifestyle, because of my goodness, you owe me. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And the dinner that night was a festival of pride. It soaked through and stained everything. And so in response, Jesus said this. When he noticed how the guests picked their places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then humiliated, man, how awkward is that? Humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. What is the immediate lesson that Jesus is trying to teach? I think it's this. The primary difference between humility and humiliation is who chooses it. When somebody else chooses it for us, it feels like this, and it looks like this to everybody else. But when we choose humility, it's actually seen as something good and valuable. So if this is the immediate lesson, is there an eternal lesson? One of the things that Jesus has made clear for us in this series is everybody lives forever somewhere. And anybody who comes to Jesus pridefully will be humiliated. So this is my question. Have you turned to Jesus and in humility asked him to give you grace. I don't know exactly how to understand what happens next. I don't know if what happens next is really loud for everyone to hear, or if it's more quiet and subtle between Jesus and just the host of the party. But this is what happens. Jesus turned and said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers, your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors, as if you do, they may invite you back so that you will be repaid. And what we're about to see is Jesus does not play. He is not to be trifled with. If you go toe-to-toe with Jesus, he is going to lay it all out on the table. And what Jesus is starting to say is, listen, dude, the only reason you set up this party is because you were looking for a payoff. This whole thing is set up to reinforce your commitment to power, comfort, success, and recognition. One of my favorite Bible teachers was a guy named Warren Wiersbe. Writing about this passage, Warren Wiersbe said this. He said, Jesus knew that the host had invited guests for two reasons. One, to pay them back because they had invited him to past feasts. Or two, to put them under his debt so that they would invite him to future feasts. Such hospitality was not an expression of love and grace, but rather an evidence of pride and selfishness. He was buying recognition. Now, what Jesus is not saying is that it's wrong to have a feast and invite your friends and loved ones over. I'm having lunch with my friends today. It ain't wrong. But this was a very exaggerated, hyperbolic, idiomatic way for Jesus to say, there's something better. And to press this point home, Jesus said to him this. He said, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Jesus said, when it comes to how you live your life and how you invest your life and how you share all that you have, don't live as this life is all there is. Live as though there is more than just this life. Join me in my campaign of compassion and grace and generous hospitality. The point I'm going to make next might sound like it came out of left field, like I took too much medication. Just hang with me. I promise it relates to what we're talking about. Go isn't merely a direction, it's a disposition. People who are followers of Jesus live their life defined by this word. Go into all the world. Go and make disciples. Go and make Jesus known. Go and serve people. Go and share the good news of the gospel. And go frequently, literally requires packing up and moving towards people. But it's not merely that. It's primarily this. It's primarily a heart that is inclined towards others. And the way that Jesus talked about it with this prominent Pharisee, it's a heart that says, I'm going to use my life, I'm going to use my home, I'm going to use my resources to go to great expense to invite others in. People who could never pay me back. People who I would never want to pay me back. Jesus talked about joining him means having a heart that is happy to go to great expense to bless others and invite others in. That is our heartbeat behind this event that we're going to do in October. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Lots of you got excited, made me feel pretty excited. October 30th, we're doing an event called Ridge Fest where we're trying to invite in, we're going to go to expense to invite in people from our community, and our goal is to have a couple of thousand people from our community here so we can bless their socks off with our generosity and hospitality and kindness, because our hope is we can begin to use this to build a bridge of friendship. And we just believe that God wants to do something big with this. We believe that God could do something. If there are a couple of thousand people who came into our building and they began to experience kindness and hospitality from us, that they might wonder, what would it be like to attend here on a weekend service? I didn't even know about this church. What could God do with that? And for us to do this well, it's going to take an all church effort. And so I'm inviting you, would you sign up? I'm inviting you, like literally, not metaphorically, literally, to pull your phone out right now and go to autumnridge.church. And you're going to click on, I see some of you got your phone on, that's great. I don't feel irrelevant right now. You just pull your phone out, go to autumnridge.church, you're going to click on I saw it in church, and then scroll down and hit Ridge Fest. And there's a way for you to sign up and join a team. And this is solely us just trying to honor Jesus. Jesus, we want to honor you. We want to invest what we have in building a bridge of friendship through hospitality and generosity and compassion. This has been our series thesis. Not all investments are equal. Why do we do what we do? Why do you do what you do? We all get to choose how we invest our lives, how we invest ourselves, how we invest everything that we have at our disposal. However we choose to invest, let's remember this, not all investments are equal. We get to invest as though life looks like this, or we get to invest as though life looks like this. And so today I want to ask you this question, and we'll close with this. Will you trade in what you cannot keep for what you cannot lose? That's the kind of thing that Jesus was trying to say to this Pharisee. Just trade it in. I promise you're getting something better. And if this sounds familiar to anyone, it's because this was inspired by a man who inspired me. Jim Elliot is a man who decades ago lost his life trying to share the gospel in the country of Ecuador, and he is remembered for saying this: he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And it's this way of thinking that makes sense of the many decades of generosity that have defined this church. It's this way of thinking that makes sense of why doctors would give up lucrative practices to move around the world and serve others in obscurity with no recognition. It's this way of thinking that makes sense of why people in this church, people like you, would quietly and happily invest in and serve others. It's this way of thinking that makes sense why so many people would share and give away their hard-earned money to invest in supporting the ministries of this church. And for those of us who are in this room, or those of us who are watching online and in your journey with Jesus, if you have not yet discovered the joy of transitioning from holding our life and our things like this and instead holding them like this and gladly giving them away to join Jesus in his campaign of grace and compassion, will you trade in what you cannot keep for what you cannot lose? This morning, I want to honor someone who lived her life saying yes to that question. This church has a long history of supporting many missionaries, and this past week, sadly, we lost one of the missionaries who we support to COVID. I can't share with you her real name or where she was, but we know her as Ruth, and the reason that we don't share her real name or where she was, because those who are in relationship with her, known associates of her, we want to make sure that they are not put in danger. Ruth lived her life saying yes to this question of joining Jesus on his campaign of compassion and grace. And we just want to honor her. And we want to remember those who are now leading in her absence in a place that's very hostile to the gospel. And I want to pray and just thank God for her. I want to pray and ask God to bless and guide those who are leading now without her. And I want to pray and ask God, would he use us to be a blessing to others? Because I'm convinced of this. I think that Jesus was trying to make clear the gospel message looks credible when people experience the incredible joy and compassion and love and grace of his followers. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for the inspiring lifestyle and legacy of a woman like Ruth. God, even though that there are many who are sad over losing her, we can celebrate that great is her reward with you right now. And God, I want to pray for those who now have to lead in her absence, who will be missing her. God, I pray that you would give them great courage and comfort and wisdom. And God, it is our intent to join you, to be like you, to live as though this life is not all there is. God, we would be thrilled if you would use us as a blessing to others. Help us to see how to do that. And God, would you empower our efforts for your glory and for the good of people in this community? And it is in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.